Welcome back to Rebound with Resilience, a podcast dedicated to raise your resilience, mindset, and mental wellness. On this episode, to talk about overcoming social anxiety and OCD, we have a good friend of mine in the studio, Ron Yap. Hello.
Hey, what's up?
Yeah, it's very nice to have you here. We've been chatting offline for a period of time, holding a couple of Clubhouse sessions, a couple of Zoom sessions as well, and finally get to host you here. So I'm quite excited. I must say, the first time I saw your profile, I was a little bit intimidated.
Yeah.
because I think back then we were mutual friends and you had a very nicely curated profile. It was very well designed. And I was like, wow, comparing his profile to mine, very typical, I know, social comparison, right?
Yeah.
But when I got to know you, you're just really, really humble and not just that. I also thought that you were older than you are. I didn't know you were in Wikimi. I thought you graduated already.
Yeah. Kind of get it sometimes.
Yeah, because it's a good thing because you wrote a book already. I think later on we'll talk about the book as well because we're giving a special offer for Ron's book for listeners, How to Overcome Anxiety. I read it and it's just so comprehensive, so detailed. That it's just like, can you imagine that you really write a book at the age?
I mean, it did take quite a bit of research research into how anxiety works and all that, and also a bit of my own personal experiences.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the case when we do research into psychology and how mental health works, right? A lot of it is very insightful but not very actionable, right? So what you have to do is compile it, you compress it into something that people can apply in their daily life, and that's something that I think I did with the book.
Yeah, you not just did, but you did with, in my opinion at least, flying colours, because I wasn't expecting so much, right? But when I read through it, it's really summarising GAD, right? I mean, not GAD, anxiety disorders. Later on, we're going to talk about OCD, which is very misunderstood. It's actually anxiety disorder. And how you then gave practical tips, which we will talk a little bit about it in this podcast. Okay, I think I went a bit long in the intro.
No, it's okay.
But I was thinking the alternative title for this could be From Social Anxiety to Becoming a Social Media Influencer.
Yeah, I saw that.
That's quite a big jump, right?
Yeah.
Because now you have over 12k followers on socials, and it must be quite a jump, from that to this. So I want to know about that, and of course how you the process along the way, typically. And of course, for guests, for listeners as well, we will talk a bit about OCD. It's very misunderstood, and how you can then overcome it or manage it in a way. Okay, so yeah, let's go into it. Oh, just want to add a disclaimer as well, right? I think Ron always mentions very importantly about this. This is not medical advice. It shouldn't replace a therapist's advice or psychologist's advice, right? It's really just sharing from lived experiences. Of course, we'll make it as factual as we can based on research, but definitely will not replace professional help or anyone that you are seeing. Let's say that's the case. Okay, so I guess let's start with growing up first. How did that social anxiety form? And we talk a bit about anxiety. You did mention in your book where you lost your dad to cancer when you're around 3 years old, and that was one of the triggers. So maybe we can start with that and then how that evolved.
Yeah. So basically, I lost my dad to leukemia when I was 3. Yeah, actually, it wasn't the death that registered that much impact on me at the time, because I think I was still very young. So actually, kind of what impacted me more over the long run, right, was kind of that loss of that guiding, I guess you could say, parental figure, right? So on one hand, you have the financial aspect, because my mom was a working mother, and honestly, she was working her butt off very frequently. And because of that, I think I was left alone for most of my life. And when you're alone, you don't really have any siblings to talk to, also not really that many close friends. You kind of get stuck at home a lot. And as a result of that kind of lack of social interaction, I kind of developed that social anxiety that I mentioned in my book.
Sure.
And I guess it's a chicken and egg problem, because I was socially anxious because I was socially awkward, because I didn't really have that much social interactions as I was growing up. Yeah. So that's something that was quite impactful on my life. So talking a bit more about that social anxiety, I guess what happened to me was that I was bullied very frequently because I was super awkward. and it hurts. It hurts a lot. And it's really kind of crippling because it's hard to imagine being in that position when you're having a conversation, right? Like what we're doing right now, and you're not really that sure whether the words that are going to come out of your mouth next is going to be something that the other party finds to be weird, right? Or something that's going to stop the conversation in its tracks, right? So what happened to me all the time was I would try and formulate these sentences in my head, but they just won't come out the way that I want them to, right? So, and after a while of doing that, I kind of realized that people found me to be quite weird.
Right. Because you're second guessing yourself, and then you're always stuck in your mind, right?
Right.
And people know that, people can see that you're stuck in your head, right?
Then as a result of that, I kind of shut down, right, after a while. Yeah, and it took me a lot of years to get me out of that shell. Yeah.
So I totally understand. Not that I could relate growing up because I wasn't socially anxious growing up. Of course, generally everybody in front of certain social situations, as an introvert myself, would feel a little bit. But I think the degree to which you felt it was a bit extreme. And I think in the book as well, you talked about anxiety, right? General anxiety, right? It's caused when a stressor is gone awry, or it's, we know the fight or flight response, right? That's to protect us. We have evolved so that when we face inverted commas a threat, our body actually produces a fight or flight response. But when that's too intense or over a lengthy period of time, that leads to problems where it's constantly being activated in weird situations.
And to add on to that, like it's activated during times and even like there is no threat like, at all. Not any physical threat. Because last time when our ancestors like they were scared of like mammoths and stuff like that. And that's a very visible threat.
Yes.
But in today's times, things like all these physical threats have been replaced by more existential ones, like losing your job or not doing well in your tests. And these things which may affect your future, right? They are kind of seen as physical threats, even though the danger may not be.
Your body responds the same way, right? As if it's a physical threat, because that is still a biological response. And it's also negativity bias, right? Because we always share in some of my podcasts that you can either, there are two mistakes you can make. Which one would you rather make, right? Thinking there's a tiger, just assume like you're in a jungle, okay? And then you're hunting. There are two mistakes you can potentially make. Thinking there is no tiger when there is one, or thinking there's a tiger where there isn't one, right? And the mind is always evolved to make the second mistake way more. Right? Because if you make the first mistake just once, you are dead. So that's why we're very kind of biased to negativity. We always overestimate threats and underestimate opportunities. So it's glad that we discussed that kind of the premise for anxiety. But how did it manifest and how did it affect your self-worth? So at the height of it.
Got it. So I think something that really, I guess, encapsulated my struggles was back during secondary school, right? Almost every day, right? I would be at the void deck, right? And just sitting down there, like thinking to myself for literally like 2 to 3 hours.
Wow.
Or just reflecting on what things that happened in the past.
Okay.
So like I'll just replay like the conversations, what I should have said, what I should have done, what would happen if I did this, did that. So I think I was literally like paralyzed. So I couldn't get that out of my head. And I'll talk about like that obsession more like in the OCD aspect. But it's really something that was really debilitating because I'll be sitting in the void. I'm telling myself, just go out. Just this doesn't matter. But then I just can't bring myself out of my head.
They're constant ruminations.
Yes, rumination. And that's because of my social anxiety. I just felt really trapped, right? And sometimes I will try and read books like how to make your conversations better, how to talk better in conversations, how to have humor in your conversations. And it's all these things that I guess should have been in me developed as when I was growing up and because I didn't like the opportunities because I didn't have those opportunities to do that, to learn those social skills. I felt very frustrated and very angsty about all of it.
When it becomes too robotic in that sense. Not that those books aren't bad. It's good in certain contexts. You help you understand. But if you just rely on that alone and not so much on practice or not so much on just play, then it becomes like you're very robotic and you're trying to overthinking.
Follow a formula. It's not science, There's no like scientific formula for how to have a good conversation. It's just something that you learn. Right? So it hurts. And it does hit your self-worth to know that you kind of lack something that most people just have, right? Or most people just learn as they're growing up. Okay. And so, like I said, I was because of that, I was bullied frequently. I didn't really have a lot of respect growing up. And I kind of realized that respect is something that all of us need. I mean, if you look at the Maslow's hierarchy, it's on the second tier. So when you don't have that, it's something that you yearn for. You yearn for in the future. And that's, I guess, what happened to me. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we will talk about how that respect kind of void became something that drove you. But before that, we want to talk about OCD, because I know that evolved into OCD, which also is a form of anxiety disorder. I spoke, because on Instagram stories as well, I asked some friends, anyone that face social anxiety or OCD. A couple of people said, don't mind sharing. Of course, I'm not going to reveal their names, but similar veins to you, when you talked about it. A lot of it started from a trigger where either they're overweight and then people just keep bullying them, and then they become in their head where they're constantly thinking about what are people thinking about me, making assumptions about me, and then that kind of evolved to OCD for some of them. So let's talk about that. Let's define OCD a little bit, because I think it's misunderstood and also used very colloquially sometimes. But what is OCD?
So OCD is actually obsessive-compulsive disorder, right? So if you think about the three words, there's three different aspects. So the first one is obsessive, right? You have an obsession, and that's talking about what's going on in your head, right? So you're obsessively fixating on, usually it's either something that's happened in the past or something that you think is going to happen in the future, right? So for me, it's I obsess a lot on conversations that I've had in the past, right? A lot of people have a lot of regrets about certain decisions that they have in the past, right? Or it could be, let's say, for example, the classic scenario that everybody mentions, everybody thinks about when they think about OCD, which is the fact that if you get into contact with germs, for example, you get a lot of diseases in the future, and you might possibly die because of that, or you or your families may be hurt because of your actions, right? So when you have an obsession about something, that's the first part of OCD. And the second part is compulsive, right? Compulsions. So these refer to rituals that people have to kind of try and make their anxiety subside, right? So this could be washing their hands frequently. This could be obsessing over decisions that they've made, planning frequently, excessive perfectionism.
Right.
So when people have a certain ritual that they have, it's called a compulsion, right? And in order for it to be classified as OCD, right, it must be a disorder. Right? It must actually affect your daily life, right? So it cannot be just, I'm like, just like check my exam over again, or like fix this, fix that. It must actually have a direct impact on your daily life, either through wasting your time, hours of your time, or wasting, or making you feel anxious to the point of paralysis. So when all these three aspects are satisfied, then basically you can give a diagnosis of OCD.
Got it.
But if not, it's just colloquial OCD.
Got it. Let's explore that a little bit, okay? Because I think in general, I talk about this mental health exists on a spectrum, right? And it's usually intensity and frequency. So you might have certain inverted commas symptoms here and there, but it's not intense enough or frequent enough for you to be diagnosed. And in the case of OCD specifically, right, it has to disrupt like your life on a very serious basis, right? If like me, for example, I have an obsessive personality trait as a perfectionist, right? But I don't think it's diagnosed as OCD because it doesn't necessarily affect my life very seriously, even though sometimes it's a bit irritating, having this very annoying obsessive personality trait. But to summarize what you mentioned, both obsessions and compulsions. It's obsessive-compulsive.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to add on, I think a lot of people think of the classic scenario like that, that you must be washing your hands frequently.
Oh yeah, that's
right. Yeah, it's the stereotype.
Yeah.
I mean, it is how it is, right?
Yeah.
But I guess for some people, right, their OCD is classified more heavily on the O part, right? The obsessive part. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like have a very set ritual. Some people can be so burdened by their thoughts, right, that they are crippled and paralyzed, and sometimes you can't even get out of bed because they're just stuck in their own head. Yeah. So I think the term for that is primary ruminators. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's something to be also aware of.
Sure. So I had a friend. I have a friend whom mentioned to me that, and this kind of is relevance to the research, right? That OCD actually is the second or third most common disorder in Singapore, right? According to stats 2016, I think 1 in 24 people are affected. But the treatment gap here is 11 years. The longest generally for any mental health disorder is OCD, because I think it's very subtle, and sometimes people, for whatever reasons, they don't seek help. But my friend was in that position. She didn't seek help for very long. Only when she realized that, oh, wow, like in her, the way she described it was that her mind latches onto something, and it usually sticks with anxiety. Like it latches on an irrational fear, and it just keep ruminating. I give some examples for audience to understand a bit more. This is just taken from the web, right? Let me know if it's accurate. But usually it's classified like fear of contamination, of germs, fear of harm from illnesses. This may include an excessive sense of responsibility for preventing the harm, which is the compulsions part. Intrusive thoughts, an image about sex, violence, accidents, excessive concern with symmetry, exactness, or orderliness. And of course, the last one, excessive concerns about religious issues and morality, even illness. It seems that that's quite a common theme.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So that is kind of the obsessions part. Let's talk about that in your context, and then of course the compulsion which you mentioned in the book that you need to pee all the time. Wow, that was quite stark, So share with us about
spoilers.
That.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So but before I go into my own story, just to talk a bit more about that, about the examples of OCD that you mentioned. So there's a lot of different ones. A lot of them are very distressing, right? So just to mention, there's also things like moral OCD, philosophical OCD. So like if your decision, for example, does not fit your own moral values, right, you're just paralyzed. You're just stuck, and you've just you can't move. Actually, you can't decide from now on. There's also things like you can edit this out if you want, like pedophile OCD. Yeah, so people have
I will include it in.
Yeah,
for awareness.
Okay, good. Yeah, so pedophile OCD, people who have pedophilic thoughts, and they can't get themselves out of it.
Right.
Things like also some people they have fears and thoughts of being like a LGBTQ.
Okay.
So all
constantly questioning their sexuality.
Yes. And they cannot find a definite answer. So a lot of that comes into obsession. So thankfully, I have had none of that. None of the more, I guess, specific forms of OCD. So for me, my compulsion was, as you said, I pee like a dog. I pee a lot. I pee like a river. Yeah. And so I'm very willing to admit this because whatever, it's just life. In fact, the CNA actually contacted me a few days before to talk about OCD.
Just a few days before this?
Yeah. To write about OCD.
Okay.
I said the same thing that I pee like a dog. So and I guess how it started, right, was in fact I remember quite clearly that it was before a camp back in secondary school when I was in MPCC. One of the worst periods of my life, but yeah. So basically I was really, really, really anxious, right? And nothing I was doing was getting me to sleep. So I guess what I was doing, right, was I was trying to find different ways, any ways at all, to kind of release my anxiety. So that came in a physical manifestation of going up to pee, even though when I knew that there was nothing inside, or very little, like 1 or 2 drops, right? And so afterwards, right, that became like a kind of a coping mechanism. Peeing became my coping mechanism.
Right, it latches in your brain, right?
Okay. As absurd as it sounds, right? Yes, that's what happened to me, right? So then after a while, it became a habit. I used to pee at night, usually whenever I got anxious. Then actually kind of also a bit evolved more into a medical problem as well. Yeah. So that took me trips to the urologist. They kind of don't really know what's going on with me yet. So it's a problem that I still deal with to this day. Yeah. But it's my body. What do I do about it? Yeah.
I appreciate your vulnerability because at least for me, I looked at your page and the work that you're doing, and it seems like you're this perfect individual, right? And you got, but it's not to say that your struggles define you, but at the same time, you're very vulnerable about it and realize that, okay, I'm still going through it. Just like how even now I talk about mental health, but I'm still facing anxiety here and there. And it's okay to be open about it.
Yeah, of course.
So I, again, really appreciate you doing that. And the book also, I think you did mention it quite specifically, and it really helped me to connect. I must, instead of just a book about, just talking about OCD just and everything, but somehow it became it became very personal, as if you lived it, and the sharing that the way you write is like, you want to help me. You really want to help. You understand, and you want to help someone in a similar position. So that's the essence that I got when I read it. And again, how did that it must be so tiring to have to do that compulsion again and again, right? Again, at the height of it, how did it affect you?
Yeah, so now it's a little bit better, but at the height of it, right? It sounds ridiculous, but I could go up to like 20 to 30 times every single night, right?
Okay, that's really insane.
Yeah, and it would take up to 4 hours of my night lah. Since my sleep was drastically affected. My sleep cycle.
What age was that? Remember?
Honestly, like probably starting from my JC period.
Right.
So 17 all the way up until my first few years of university lah. So 17 to 22, 23.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was quite painful lah. Yeah.
Wow, that is. I can't imagine how painful that would be, because it's like you have to do it, but you know it's affecting your sleep and
correct
and your energy.
Like I guess the worst thing about it is that you know that it's irrational. You know that it's something that you shouldn't do, yet you're still doing it, right? And I guess a bit more of that. OCD. There's a difference between OCD and OCPD.
Okay.
So obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, and the difference between the two is that for OCD you know that it's irrational, right? But you just can't get yourself out of it. For OCPD people, they think that it's irrational. So they think that it's rational. They think that washing your hands obsessively does help in some way, and that the benefits outweighs the cons.
I see.
Yeah. So that one is a personality disorder, but OCD is an anxiety disorder.
Right. So you're aware that it's not helping, but you can't.
And you just can't get out of that loop in your mind. Yeah, and it just hurts. It hurts.
Yeah, I guess we won't go into the psychological basis behind it, but it has to be something to do with our mechanisms and the way, because we are routine creatures and we generally function with patterns, right? And that's how we survive. So when that's taken to the extreme, it becomes maladaptive. It's not just that. Could you just share for awareness, what are some other compulsions that people you heard of or you read about? Yeah,
so obviously the classic scenario is the washing the hands, the drying, like washing the clothes as well. I know of, I read before of a mother who actually washed her son's army uniform so much that it became white. Yeah.
Oh.
So it's hard. I thought that the number 4 was like indestructible.
Yeah.
Until you see like the white color, it's like almost bleached. Yeah. So that's one thing. And OCD can revolve around almost anything. I know a girl that I talked to via Instagram that her OCD comes in the form of food. Right? So if she has to eat her meals in a certain order, otherwise she cannot eat them at all. She will throw up. Yeah. So there's also OCD about I guess catastrophes or disasters, right? That if I don't do this certain thing, like if I don't like close the curtains a certain way, or if I don't like adjust the time a certain way, that something disastrous will happen, something catastrophic will happen. Yeah. Okay. So there's all of these different compulsions and rituals, and it could be anything, right? Yeah. So it manifests in different ways.
Okay. Let's talk about overcoming, the process of overcoming it. There are a lot of people who want to hear this. And of course, we also will talk about just managing general anxiety, because I think some of the things that we talk about is also applicable just to anybody.
Yes. Yeah.
So let's go into that. What was that recovery process like for you?
Got it. So for OCD, to be very honest, I am still dealing with it. It's a little bit better, but I'm still in the midst of it.
Okay.
But I guess what really made it better was confronting why I did these actions in the first place. Yeah. So at the root of it is anxiety. Right? What am I anxious about? So when I did deal with that, it helped a bit better. But more specifically for OCD, right? There's a new form of treatment called ERP, which is exposure and response prevention. I don't have any history of it myself.
Okay.
But as the name suggests, right, it's having a professional expose you to what scares you.
Okay.
Right. So whether it's germs or not peeing or not washing your clothes, right? And in a sense, you eat the fear. Yeah. So you realize that even if you don't do the action, nothing bad happens. Yeah. And that's kind of what breaks you out of your loop. Right. And that takes a trained professional. But the idea is that sometimes if you extend the fear, or if you extend the period of being in the fear, you get comfortable with it. And you realize that, yes, you may feel discomfort, but you don't necessarily have to feel uncomfortable.
Okay.
Right? So that's the idea behind ERP.
It's like desensitizing yourself to it. Is it like kind of a subset of CBT as well?
Yes,
I believe
yes,
so,
yes.
right? It's kind of under the same premise. I guess it's a good transition to talk about CBT because I know that you did a course recently on that. You invested into that. But before I talk about it, a friend of mine actually mentioned that ERP helped her a little bit. She had OCD. She did a bit of research and then she did a bit of practice and also went to see a therapist. And I think that helped. I think it's rare for people listening to maybe have a more serious form of OCD, but I think that you do find that, okay, certain things relate. You might want to go and see if you get yourself diagnosed or just have a professional's advice on that.
Yeah. And even if you don't have OCD, like maybe you have obsessive-compulsive traits, right?
Yeah.
That idea still applies.
Right.
Yeah. So even if you are a perfectionist, right? Maybe try purposely not being perfectionist, right? Maybe just leave a typo in that purposely to get rid of that fear, right? And you realize that actually nothing happens, right? Nothing happens at all when people don't really care, right? And then what happens is that that fear dispels within you.
You create a new loop, a new neural pathway in your brain. So let's talk about I think I skipped to OCD. We talked about ERP, but what about the social anxiety part? Because I'm so sorry, I forgot to introduce you proper earlier, but I guess it's in the description already. But I just want to say that Ron, he is working in VaynerMedia. So if you don't know Gary Vaynerchuk, right? He's working in a company, VaynerMedia in Singapore. So he does a lot of media related stuff. He's good at what he does. And he also runs an Instagram page called Mental Health CEO, which has over 12,000 followers. And of course, produces content that helps people gain awareness. And when I read through it, it's just the thought process is very deep. And it helps me to really think about the nuances about mental health. So definitely go and check it out. But when I describe this to you, it almost seems like, wow, it's quite a stark contrast, right? Because you were sitting by the void deck 3 hours thinking about stuff, and now you're producing content daily or every other day where you're exposed to stresses, right? And so I'm curious to know, what was that transition from social anxiety to being a social media influencer?
Okay. Yeah, so it really is a big step. The fact that I can be here talking to you and facing the cameras is something that maybe
hats off to you.
Like if I was 3 or 4 years back, I would never imagine that I'll be in this situation, and I'm very grateful for that. So there's a few things that actually got me out of social anxiety, right? And I guess the most tangible thing, right, was that when I entered university, I actually got a close circle of friends that I could rely on for emotional support that I didn't really have that much back in my previous years. And what that did for me was that I was able to talk freely without being judged, and that I could relate to people with my sense of humor, with the kind of topics I want to talk about. And when that happened, it kind of convinced me that I had value and I could bring value to different conversations, right? And so that was very beneficial for me. And I guess the second thing was a kind of a thought process and a realization that I had, which is that honestly, most people don't really care about you that much. Yeah, most people have their own food stuck so far. I mean, you've heard it before.
You just mentioned it before. It's okay, you can say it. You can say it.
Most people, I'll use the more easy version. Sure. Most people have their own foot stuck so far up their own butt, right?
Yeah.
They don't care about you, right? And I'm not sure what convinced me that was the case, but after a while I realized that most people are drowning in their own problems so much that your minor transgression, or let's say you said the wrong thing or you did the wrong thing during conversations, it didn't really register to them that much. It doesn't register to them that much. And that was something that was very, very influential for me in realizing that. It also kind of made me a bit more irreverent, so to speak. Yeah. And so another thing that gave me confidence was growing the page, right? Because previously in the past, even though I had successes, they didn't really convince me that I had self-worth and that my own flaws outweighed my own positive and achievements. So the fact that I was able to grow the page, receive positive feedback from people saying that, hey, your post really resonated with me, thank you so much. And then I was also helping people in person via Zoom. And they also mentioned that it was something that was really helpful for them. Also went on to further convince me that I could bring value to people and society in general. And so all these things combined, I guess you could say it might have been a twist of luck that really brought me out of social anxiety. And I was very, very grateful for that.
Yeah. You did a play as well, right?
Oh, yes.
Again, made quite big contrast, in front of hundreds of people.
Yeah. I guess a funny story about that is I can just say to
Yeah.
make it a bit lighter.
Sure.
Is there's this play in my school, Wee Kim Wee, the School of Communication and Information, called the Papa Play, and it's like an annual play, right? And the story is that I auditioned for the boy role, and then at the same time they also since they were there, you want to audition for the uncle role as well. So yeah, sure, why not? Yeah, then as you can probably suspect, I got the uncle role, not the boy role. So yep, I guess I'm more mature than I seem.
Sure. Yeah, it's just a role thing. Okay. Yeah, Papa, I was on Wikimi as well, in case you all don't know. And then I watched the play. It's nice. They usually have a play like customary every year. Yeah. I can't remember exactly what. Mine was about studies and education. I can't remember the exact name for it, but it's fun. It's fun being part of a production, exposing yourself, talking to people, like you said, a close group of friends that helped you. It's very nice to hear that you came out of that.
Right. And I guess also the fact that I was also exposed to acting, being trained in acting, allowed me to, I guess, see, understand the psychology behind characters in their past, right? And apply their own, I guess, framework and methodology to my own life, and as well as how to change it, right? So all these character development methods, all these characterization methods was actually kind of helpful for me.
Right. Okay. Cool. In fact, my friends, those that I actually talked to, right, about this, all of them mentioned that they overcome social anxiety by actual exposure. One of them mentioned that she had to be put in leadership positions. She has diplopia and she was kind of forced into it. She took on the role. Another one, my friend mentioned about it's still a process of overcoming, but then she had to put herself out there and focus on a task for her. It's just focusing on a task and not too much about people around her, like you said. So again, but then this, I must imagine, can be quite tricky because it is a huge trigger for some people, so it has to be managed. And I would say, don't just take our advice face value. You got to maybe counter check with therapists or somebody that's a professional before you apply it. Okay, but this seems to be the general theme.
Yeah, and don't rush things. Take it slow. This is a habit that you've learned for many years, so have to be realistic about it. You cannot unlearn it in maybe a few weeks. Even if it takes months, I would still say it is a worthwhile endeavor of putting yourself out there, of realizing that people, that you do have value. You do have value. Yeah.
Okay, love that. Let's talk about general anxiety. Let's talk about general anxiety, because in the book you mentioned two things. I think CFAC. CFAC as well as mindfulness that could help with anxiety, and I think it applies to social anxiety, but it also applies to general anxiety, right? Just that may not be diagnosed, but for anybody, generally we face anxiety on depends how intense you do it. But for me as an entrepreneur, I do face anxiety where I'm lost in the monkey mind, get distracted by thoughts, distracted by consequences. What are some ways that we can help with that?
Got it. So basically in my book, I talk about two different techniques to deal with anxiety, right? And they both have to actually be applied simultaneously, right? So the one you mentioned, CFAC, right, is the kind of short-term method for dealing with anxious thoughts, right then and there.
Okay.
What I describe it as is a kind of a first aid kit or a bandage for your anxious thoughts, right? So just to give you a very, very quick lowdown on it, CFAC stands for categorize, fact check, affirm, and consequences. Right, so for categorize, what I recommend is that you say out why you're anxious, in a sentence. So I'm anxious because this, right? And then what happens as you say it out, the anxious thought, right? You realize that it falls into a category of unhelpful thought or an unhelpful thinking style. Whether it's a black and white thinking, whether it's an irrational mischaracterization, whether you're ignoring your own positives.
Overgeneralization.
Yes.
You mentioned something about mind reading.
Yeah,
Is
mind
this
reading. This person must be future telling, catastrophizing. Then you categorize it and you realize that it is an unhelpful thinking style. That's step number 1, which is self-awareness. Right. Step number 2 is fact-check it. Right. You use logics and facts. Right. And you kind of realize that it's not that big of a deal. Either that there's evidence to disprove your assumption, or that even if it does happen, it's not the end of the world, right? That's fact-checking. And when you affirm and you say to yourself, these thoughts have no water, or these thoughts have no grounds. And so basically that kind of, you kind of put your foot down in your mind, and you're telling your mind, thank you for your input, but this is not a thought that's very helpful to me right now. And then the consequences, it's an optional step, but it's saying to yourself, if I continue to have this line of thought, what will actually happen to me, right? Let's say you're an entrepreneur and you're worrying about basically like failure, right? And the consequence of that, if you worry too much, is that it will prevent you from taking action. It will prevent you from actually moving forward as an entrepreneur, right? By making you less averse to risk. Okay. So when you combine all of these things together, you realize that, hey, actually this does work, and it acts as kind of like a stoppage, a temporary, you kind of beat down the anxious thought. But obviously, what happens sometimes is that it keeps, it comes back over and over and over again. So, and honestly, you cannot just keep fighting your thoughts every time it comes, because you'll be paralyzed. Right? Like what was happening to me. So honestly, sometimes the best thing to do when you have an anxious thought is not to engage with it. Right? I like to think of it as like the tentacles grabbing, like trying to grab around. So instead, what you should do is to observe it, be aware of it, but not necessarily engage with it. Right? And that's the essence of mindfulness.
Love it. Yeah. Let's transition and talk about mindfulness. I did one episode previously with Aaron D. You should definitely check it out, because we explore mindfulness in that episode on YouTube, or of course
I saw it's very, very helpful.
Wow. Yeah. And the fact is that when I read your book, the things that you mentioned actually is very congruent to what she said about focus, attention, and observation. She mentioned those are the skills of mindfulness. So let's reiterate it a little bit. Okay, how letting your thoughts flow, what are metaphors you can use, and the skills of mindfulness.
Got it. So in mindfulness, there's different forms of mindfulness, but the one that I guess I resonate with the most is called detached mindfulness, right? And what usually happens in detached mindfulness is that you treat your thoughts, as you said, as a form of metaphor, right? So you treat it as something else. So this can be different things. Can be like leaves floating down a river, can be movies playing in your head, or it can be like nothing that people like to do is treat it as like advertisements that are popping up. All those online ads which are annoying, but you can click out of it, right? But for me, what I choose is clouds. Clouds flowing in the sky.
Yeah, it's nice metaphor.
Like clouds, floating in the sky.
Very calming.
Yeah. And I guess the similarities between all of these, right, is that yes, they are there, but no matter what you do, there'll always be more of it, right? And they don't have to hurt you if you don't let them. Like movies, for example, you just watch them played out in your head. You don't like reach out and try and change what's happening in the movie, right? You just let it be. And once the movie ends, you move on to what you're doing before then, right?
Sure.
And that's a habit that you have to pick up. That's attention training. There's a lot of things that you can do with it, like basically going on a walk and seeing all these different things. It's attention training.
And I know I keep talking about your book, right? But we do have like kind of an offer that we're offering to people 40%, and I know I do a proper promotion later on together with your vision, but I just want to say that in the book it really talks about this in detail, and it's very helpful steps. Right now this is more of like a teaser and you sharing it, but if you want, the book is something that you really consider, because it's worth a lot more than the cost that I'm paying for. I know I'm going back a little bit, because we mentioned about CFAC just now, and we talked about unhelpful thinking patterns. Again, this is something you can Google. We can't go through everything because we don't have time. There are many unhelpful thinking patterns. But if you just Google unhelpful thinking patterns, I think it's codified, right? And it's all there for you to gain awareness. So definitely go and do that, because it helps you be aware that, this is actually a common thinking pattern. It's a maladaptive in some sense, and you got to kind of realize that, okay, I can then, what can I do to work on it? So now we talked about CFAC, we talked about mindfulness. I want to add on to mindfulness as well. It's really about the monk mind versus the monkey mind, right? The monkey mind is distracted, anxiety, but the monk mind is it's just a metaphor. It's just very calm. It's not reactive to stresses. It's able to, like you said, observe your thoughts, right? Not engage with it, discern, and then kind of choose a response from there. Talk to me a bit about attention and focus, because I know that's a core aspect of mindfulness. Yes. How do you train your brain to just focus on the present?
Got it. So yeah, I wouldn't say I'm very well versed in mindfulness,
right?
But basically, I can say what has been helpful for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, I have this habit of going on walks. Yeah. And you'd be surprised how much that helps you. It sounds like a very self-help.
No, it's cool.
Yeah, but it's actually very, very helpful, right? So because I guess story about me is that I tried to pick up meditation. I got into it for a while. Then I got out of it for whatever reason. Then so basically I started to go on walks. Yeah. So when I was walking, something that's very helpful that you can do is to try and train your attention to focus on specific things, right? So for example, what you ask questions and then you answer them. For example, what are people wearing? What are the clothes people are wearing? Do you see any similarities between them? What sounds do you hear right now? Do you hear any birds, any dogs, or whichever question that comes to your mind? And the purpose of these exercises, right, is to train your attention such that when you're focusing on these questions, you focus on these questions solely, right? And even if other distracting thoughts come into your mind, you just let them be. You focus on your task at hand, because that, in the end, that's the end goal of mindfulness. You have a singular focus, and then even if you have a lot of these other distractions coming to you, you focus back on it. You retrain your attention to come back to it, right? So you don't have to do this just with walks. You can do it with meditation. You can do it with listening to music, right? So if you have a specific instrument that you're playing, you're noticing the chords, noticing the tunes, on all these different things.
Erin actually said the exact same thing. She said that one easy way to practice mindfulness is literally being mindful of the present, right? Like your sensations and your five senses. What you're seeing, how you're feeling. She asked me, how do you know when I'm brushing my teeth? So she said, instead of letting your mind wander, you focus on just the sensations of brushing, your feet on the floor, the sounds around you. Personally, to be very honest, I haven't practiced it to the extent I want to, but I feel like I have to, because recently I've been facing a bit of anxiety over typical entrepreneur stuff. But the idea is that you train your brain to put your attention on the present, so that it's not caught in the ruminations of the past or the worry of the future.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And honestly, if you find it hard to do, right, you just try it with something. You just start off with something that you enjoy first, right? A leisurely activity that's already in your schedule, right? So even if it's like watching a movie or watching a video game, playing a video game, right? Just enjoy the moment, yeah. And just train your attention to enjoy all these pleasures of life, and that's a very good starting point.
Cool. The five senses, just remember your five senses. Okay, so we discussed mindfulness and of course CFAC. I think the last thing we'll talk about is CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. It's used quite a lot in psychotherapy. People use it colloquially as well. But I know that recently you did a course on it, you invested quite an amount. So I know it's a huge thing, but let's summarize it for people to understand at the core tenet of it, what it is. Because I use it in some of my programs as well. I would share my experience. I want to hear from Ron first. What is the core tenets of it?
So the main idea behind CBT is that everybody faces problems or issues in life. But what happens is that we dig ourselves into our own holes with what we like to call maladaptive or unhelpful thoughts and behaviors. Right? So when we rely on these too much as coping mechanisms, it causes a lot of problems for us in the long run. So what CBT does is identify these maladaptive or unhelpful problems, unhelpful thoughts and behaviors, right, and see how we can change them. So for the C part, which is the cognitive aspect, right, it's identifying, like we said before, the unhelpful thoughts, right? So whether it's a generalization,
black and white thinking,
So what we usually do is that we take these beliefs, right, and then we do fact-checking, right? We use this process called Socratic questioning, in which we give the evidence for and against. And then when we do that, we realize that, yes, there may be some element of truth in this belief, but usually it's not true entirely. It's not true 100%, right? And that allows us to move on. When we realize that it's not an entirely correct belief that we are holding, that allows us to move on to the problematic behaviors that are upholding the belief.
Yeah,
Right.
it's true because a lot of consequences, right? Emotional consequences, behaviors are fundamentally traced to certain underlying beliefs,
Yes.
basement beliefs about something, which could have been there because of, I think, past stigma, people bullying you, whatever that case is, right? We develop some unhealthy beliefs that is not helpful to us in functioning. And CBT is about identifying and then working on them.
Yes.
Yeah, so let's talk a bit more about working on them.
Got it. So, like you said, the first thing you need to do is identify the base beliefs, right? So what we have is there's this thing called a negative triad, right? So it's negative beliefs about yourself, the future, and the world, right? So it could be like I am unlovable, I'm a failure. It could be the world is unfair and unpredictable, or that others will surely find me useless, or it could be that I will always be useless in the future. So once you have these beliefs, right, the first thing, like I said, is to deal with them, is to remind yourself of why these beliefs may not necessarily be 100% true.
Right.
So think of what happened in your past. In which cases were you actually successful? In which cases were you were actually lovable, or maybe you felt a lot of maybe you had value, right? So when you do that, you work on it, and then you realize what I do is I take a look at people's past and I ask them what actually worked for you in the past, right? So then they will say I did this and I did that. Right, and then so basically those qualities are something that you can use and build on to build better behaviors in the future. And on the behavioral aspect, it depends on what kind of issue that you're facing. So for anxiety, we could address it with things like meditation, mindful walking, the things that we address, the things we talked about before.
I see. So that's the behavioral part of it.
Yes.
Okay.
So actually, my CFAC method, right, is actually CBT.
It's
basically
correct. It's really the underlying premise. In fact, ABCDE as well, something that I talked about. It's also like a branch of it, right, where it's an activating event, right, or adversity, and then you have your consequences. So you write that out and you identify what's the underlying belief that's driving that consequence. And then ABCD, D stands for disputations, right? Disputing the unhelpful beliefs that you just mentioned. And then E stands for effective new beliefs, right? Creating effective new beliefs. And again, to go one step further, I think Martin Seligman, he's like kind of the founder of positive psychology. He talked about three broad ways people or three broad beliefs about failure that's crippling. Number one is personalization. Second one is permanence, thinking that your failure is permanent. And the third one is pervasiveness, thinking it will affect all the areas of your life. And I think all this is just codification. Don't get caught up in it. You can depend on what you want to use, but the idea is that there's always an underlying belief that is helpful, unhelpful, and it's
So actually you mentioned ABCD, right? That's under Alice, right?
Yeah.
This is just a bit of background information. Alice is the creator of RwRPT, which is I think it's called Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy,
right?
Which is a branch or a subset of CBT, right? It goes further more into detail. There's a few subtle differences, right? And the reason why I bring him up is that I also mentioned this previously, that there's similar to the three ideas that Silman brought up. There's also this thing called the three musts by Elisa as well. Okay. So what he's saying is that there's three musts that we have in our minds that is putting us into a lot of pain, right? So the three musts are: I must do well, otherwise I must be perfect, otherwise I'm no good. That other people must be perfect and fit what I think of them, otherwise they are no good. And the world must fit my version of what it has to be like, otherwise the world is no good. Okay. Right. So when you have all these three different beliefs together, it creates a cycle of pain that we need to get rid of.
Right. I know listening to us, right, it might seem a little bit overwhelming, but don't worry. Yeah, because there are many ways to classify thoughts, right? Yeah. But the idea is that we just want you to raise your awareness to know that fundamentally having awareness of your belief systems helps, right? And how you can potentially dispute them, change them in different methods. You can obviously go and research. There's so much information out there. But if you feel a need that you could potentially help, a coach or a therapist could potentially help, then I would suggest go and definitely consider one for yourself.
Like we can talk as much as you want about it. But in the end, I
need to work through it, right?
A skilled professional would do much better.
Okay, but we hope we give you that springboard.
Like I honestly learning about CBT and then I'm also doing an ACT course, which is acceptance and commitment therapy, was really helpful for me because it allowed me to identify the kind of unhelpful belief systems that I was holding, the unhelpful behaviors that I was practicing and allow me to make steps to fixing them. Yeah.
You have made very bold steps, which is a good segue to our last segment on your page, your Instagram account, and the work that you do. So, again, I mentioned earlier from social anxiety to being a social influencer. Why it stuck? Because we know that social media can be a huge source of stress and anxiety. So how do you deal with feedback, right? Of course, how you grow your page. I think that one go and listen to the previous one of the episodes on media, mental health, advocacy. Ron is inside as well. He touched on that, so he won't cover it today. You want to reach out to Ron, you can as well on Instagram Growth. But today I want to focus really more on the emotions of it. So how do you manage potential stresses and feedback?
Got it. So you mean like bad feedback?
Yeah. Or just generally, when you deal with a page, you are exposed to more things.
Yeah. So I guess in terms of feedback, right? Because mental health is such a sensitive topic, that inevitably that you're gonna make mistakes. That's what I feel. So there are some, and it depends on how what kind of feedback that you're getting. So the kind of positive feedback that I welcome, right? It's, let's say I use a term in not the right sense of the word. So the example that I use is that last time I used to say for people who were having panic attacks that one of the affirmations could be, you're safe and you're harmless, right? This will nothing will happen to you. But then people who actually faced panic attacks before came up and said to me that it's not true, because what happens if you're driving? What happens if you're in a high place? So when you do that, you take a step back and you realize that, okay, sure, I made a mistake. I should have used this word in a better context, or basically I should have used a different word altogether. And that's something that you change and you learn. Especially since I'm not a therapist. I'm not a trained therapist. I don't really have a psychological background. So that's one thing to consider. But I think what is also important to consider is that there are some people who completely don't believe in the idea of mental health. Right? And you face this kind of people, whether you're whatever social cause that you're fighting for, that people who are completely opposed to you. And in fact, I had one post up about how I was debating this guy.
Yeah, you told me.
Yeah. I really I regret getting that.
But it's good feedback, right? Some things just better not to engage. But you want to share more about that.
Got it. Yeah. So they say there's this guy who straight up did not believe that mental health was a thing. He thought that depression, he didn't want
it's a choice.
It's a choice. He blamed the people who were depressed for being depressed, for not doing things that made him happy in quotation marks. It's a motivation problem.
Yeah.
And that pissed me off And I was trying to engage with him. Yeah. And as a result of that, because at that point in time I was at 5, 6 a.m. I couldn't sleep. And basically, like I said, I was digging myself into a hole. And so he was saying all these different things to try and hurt me. Yeah. And honestly, a lot of it did. He was saying that, he's saying that you don't want to help these people at all. You don't want to, with your method, right, they will never get better.
Sure.
And then that hurt me for in fact, it still does sometimes. Yeah. But really, how you deal with that, right, is that you take a look. Yes, they may be arguing in a certain way, and they may be very hard to penetrate their line of belief, but at the end of the day, you look at the people that you help, right? Yep. And you realize you have a track record of actually helping people, right? And when you realize the good that you've done, and that you kind of realize that you don't have to deal with these people at all. Yeah.
Very nice. You just applied CBT. You just applied it because you correct, because you just fact checked it, right? And you realize that there are many times where I have successes, and it shows that I value my work.
Yes. Yeah.
And it helps. Which leads to my next question, right? I kind of answered it, why do people follow you, and what's your branding, inverted commas? But why do you think people follow you? I believe it's partially that, but is anything else you feel?
So I guess those two questions are quite similar. So people follow me because of my content, right? And because they find my content valuable and reliable, which are the two aspects of good content, I think. So you ask me why people follow me, that is the reason. Because I think that's usually why people follow, because they find value in the concept they're following. Whether it's through educational value or making them feel understood, or there's humorous value, right? And another thing is that relatability.
Yes.
So I'm not just another page that posts helpful infographics and all that, which is good lah,
Yeah.
But especially if you're running an account of some sort or a brand of some sort, I think people want to see who you are behind that mask, right? So in terms of branding, I would say that yes, I can give you helpful tips and all that, but I guess I am also someone who has seen suffering before and faced it a lot, but yeah, I still choose to see that life is worth living. I still choose to see that I still choose to remain optimistic, and I still choose to fight. And I think people
See that?
Yeah, people appreciate that.
I appreciate that a lot. I'm not gonna lie, because like you said, sometimes it's just a couple of quotes here. Nothing wrong with that. But when it's personalized, right, there's a face behind it, where I know there's this person that has struggled before, and it's very real, right? And you type it out in also first person as well. It is very real. It's like your captions are a world of its own. It's not just the content, but not just the design, but also the captions that make you really think about things. That's at least for me, lah. And I put your notifications, so
Really?
yeah.
Thank you.
So I can, and that's a tip I learned from you. Because you also talk about Instagram growth and everything. And I want to let you know, right, that Ron is very good, even though we've not talked about this at all, right? But he is also very skilled in social media, and his intentionally grew his page to outreach, for good reasons, for intention, and for consciously thinking about that brand. Okay, so that leads me to the last question: what impact or reward is the most fulfilling for you in doing this, and what's your vision for the future?
Got it. So actually, I would say the biggest impact, as I said before, is that it gave me confidence, right? In knowing that, number one, I can grow, that my efforts have actually made it to be a successful endeavor, right? And number two, in knowing that I have actually helped people, and knowing that that my posts resonate with a lot of people, is something that is very, very fulfilling. Yeah, and it's given me, I guess, a path in life to go towards. And I think if there is some meaning in life, I think that I have it. I have mine. Yeah.
Sure.
So these two things are pretty much the biggest impact on me, and I'm very grateful for that. Yeah. So the other question was what was my vision for it, right? So I think like what I said to you before, that I think there's only so much I can do with posts, right? So, and right now I'm actually doing, I've done the CBT course, and right now I'm also learning ACT, which is Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. So what I would personally like to do is to make it into a brand, into an actual, I guess, coaching business now. Yeah. It's something that I can use. Well, I may not be like a psychotherapist, or I may not have like a master's in psychology. What I can do is, I guess, impart what I actually learned from CBT and ACT in a very actionable framework, and then use it to help other people help themselves, right? What a quote that I like to use is helping people to become their own therapist, right? Because that's what I did for me.
Sure.
Yeah. So that is my vision for the immediate future, for this page in particular.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very nice. That's a very nice conclusion to this.
Yeah.
We will have to talk about the last thing. Don't run away first, because we have something for you, like I said.
Yep.
It's rare that nowadays we don't necessarily monetize my podcast, because I said I want to make it grow before I can do it responsibly. But I think it just so happened that we're good friends, and that we can offer something to you listeners, I don't know how of you that are watching, but I just felt that it really is worth the value. That Ron actually wrote a book. Okay, I will edit it in terms of down here, just a bit of scroll through. But it's a book about how to overcome anxiety, right? Where you share some, like you said, unhelpful thinking that people might have. You talk about also the methods that can help step by step. And also, finally, a part we never discussed earlier, nutrition. Okay, and that I found it very interesting as well. Nutrition and how that can help you. Because briefly talk about that, since we didn't.
So basically, in the book, I also talk about nutrition now, which is like a very, very not very talked about a lot in mental health. Which is that, yes, you can talk about thoughts, about behaviors, all that, but honestly, if you're eating like crab,
Yeah.
it will still affect you.
It will.
Because your physical health,
Exactly.
your physical health affects your mental health. It's
Yeah.
health in general.
Yeah.
Right. So things like there's these things that cause your body inflammation. Right. So sugars, like different you
Saturated. A lot.
If you read the book,
you know.
That all these things, right, once you eat them, right, that they have certain effects on your body, and they can cause things like hormone imbalances. They can cause your gut to react in certain ways that may not be desirable. So
and but your gut and your brain is very closely linked. People do not realize that it's literally linked by the vagus nerve. And it affects us when you get anxious. Sometimes you feel like vomiting. You know?
And you feel butterflies in your stomach. It's because of like the link between your brain and your gut, right? So if you eat poorly, your gut will suffer and your brain will suffer as well. Then, as you mentioned, anxiety is your fight or flight system in overdrive. And sometimes what you eat, what you do with your body will cause your body to react in overdrive, no matter what you think and no matter what you do. So if you're interested in that and if you want to kind of realize or kind of discover what mistakes you have been making in your nutrition so far that's contributing to anxiety, do feel free to grab a copy.
Yes. We're having a 40% off, right? That's a significant amount for listeners. 40% off. Okay, just put in a code. It's an ebook. Okay, I'll put up the link below. The code. What is the code again?
40 off rebound. Yeah.
Nice.
So
okay.
That will drop the price by 10 USD.
Okay.
Which means it's really, it's a big discount. Yeah.
It's a big discount now. Of course, insert that into here and also into the link, whatever this post is going to go. But I would say, Jen, it's really worth it because I read it, and it's just so much thought and effort into it. Just amazed. I'm amazed that you can write a book at this age. It inspires me also to start my book.
You should, honestly. Yeah.
You should, I want to write a book, 100 people in resilience. And then what are their tips and insights into that? Of course, within my personal story. So working on that. You'll definitely be in one of them.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. I will shout it out as well. Let me know when it's done. Yeah.
Okay, I think it comes to the end. Is there any last message, I guess, you want to share for anyone that is facing anxiety or an OCD?
I think what I have to say is that it's kind of, once you live in anxiety and OCD for so long, right, it kind of becomes a comfort zone for you, right? And some people have been anxious for so long and for the vast majority of their lives that they cannot imagine a life without it, right? And honestly, you shouldn't. As with all comfort zones, it prevents you from growing and it prevents you from leading the life that you deserve to live. So what my advice is do something. Right? Don't just stick in that position where you're in. Can be anything as long even if it's a small move, even if it's like walking every day, or breathing or meditating for 5 to 10 minutes every day. All these small steps, all these baby steps, will accumulate and will make you a better person. It will make your life so much better. And I know because it has made mine better. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Ron. With that, we've come to the end. Of course, follow Ron on Instagram at Mental Health CEO. Follow and subscribe to the podcast. If you're listening to this on YouTube, check out Spotify as well because they are bite-sized, episodes that I do. But with that, stay resilient and I'll see you in the next episode.
Hey, see you.
Bye.
Bye.